Hello, and welcome to the UW Product Management Podcast. My name is Nick, and I'll be chatting with both students and professionals in product management to gain some insights into the different parts of the role and how you can get into it.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. What are you up to these days? What were you doing in UW before? Yeah.
So I'm Sefunmi. I attended UW for electrical and computer engineering. I graduated in the year of 2017, so I was class of 2017. I was actually in the electrical engineering program. So while I was here, I did like different types of co-ops. So I spent my early co-ops strengthening my technical skills as a software developer. I worked a couple roles as a dev. I did front end. I did just general software engineering, and it was okay. It just gave me like a good insight. It's like, okay, do you know what? This is what it takes to build something. But I wanted to do something different, and I didn't know what that was. And so I'd always had this idea. So I like solving problems. Like, I think I describe myself as a problem solver. I see something, and I've tried to find ways to make it better just generally. And so I had a problem while I was going through Waterloo, especially since I'm an international student, and the transition into Waterloo wasn't as smooth. And the result of that was myself and a bunch of my friends seriously struggled with first year. So a lot of my friends actually ended up failing out and starting again. Some ended up, dropping out or going to a different program or going to a different school. And it's something that was very close to me because I was also almost one of the people who would not have made it to 1B. So I really wanted to solve that problem. So it was in my mind for a while, and it wasn't until my 3A term where I made the decision. Well, technically I made the decision like after 2B that I'm gonna take an e-co-op term. So an e-co-op term is an enterprise co-op term where the university gives you time to work on your own startup. And I made that decision while I was in 2B that I'm going to do this. I'm going to work on this startup, this idea. So, no student has to struggle with, passing. I was trying to figure out what the problem was. And going through that process, I just realized this is like a long tell me about yourself.
Don't worry about it.
But yeah, I looked to solve that problem, took a term off to figure it out. And that is sort of what my first introduction into product management was. Like, I didn't know that it was product management that I was doing. I was just sort of trying to figure everything out, the development, the design, talking to customers, pitching, talking to investors, doing marketing, and I really enjoyed it. That's still my best ever experience. Like, I wasn't making any money, but I had such a great time. And even when I went back to school and I realized that the startup didn't work out, it was called PAVE, and it was a time management tool for students to improve and enhance their productivity. I went back to school and I was like, I wanted to do something similar, which is when I learned about product management. And then since then, I've taken more of the product manager route. And I'm currently a product manager at a company called Ecobee. We make smart home devices. So that's my little spiel. Tell me about yourself.
I'm actually curious. So what were like the biggest problems with transitioning, like in terms of from the international student perspective?
I just think the way we're taught was different. Because you're in a whole different country. Like, I came from Nigeria, some of my friends came from Ghana, other places as well. It's just a different style. I mean, we did do 1 year of high school here, but it didn't really, well, some of us, not all of us, it didn't really prepare us for what the Waterloo life was going to be. It was a lot of class. It was a lot of content that we hadn't been exposed to before. Like, that was the first time I was ever taking a programming course. And then physics was, I don't understand why the physics was that hard. Like, physics in high school was not a problem for me. I wrote physics Olympiad a while back. I was in Nigeria, but it was just different. And I was like, wow, this is so much harder than I expected to be. And then you're in an environment where, no one's trying to hold your hand and no one's trying to tell you to do all these things. You're supposed to just like be disciplined and do all that. So it's challenging to, for a 17-year-old to try and figure all that stuff out and trying to remain steady. So I think that was the biggest issue with transitioning. But eventually, with Waterloo and anyone that's going through any form of like stress, like, it gets better. You sort of understand the system and you understand how to get by.
That's awesome. You also kind of like nicked some of my other questions by just that, so that's good. You like covered the how did you get into the product management one, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
I can touch on that a little bit more because I think there's still, like, that was just like at a high level. Just want to give a quick intro, but then we'll dive deeper into that. So in trying to get into product manager, I wasn't actively trying to. I wanted to become a product manager. So what happened was, I was in this co-op term, and it was an e-co-op term. I didn't really have a plan. It was just me, and I was lucky enough to get a friend of mine who was in first year nano. He's actually graduating today. He's the person that I went for his graduation. Shout out to DK, in case if you're listening to this. He was going to use his first co-op term to also work with me. So it was just me and one other co-op, and we're going to build an iOS and an Android app, in 4 months. And I also had a couple friends working with me on the side. So I was sort of trying to like coordinate everything, like, oh, how do you figure things out? Like, how do you plan the work that you're supposed to do? When does the design happen? And so throughout that journey, I went out on campus and I spoke to customers, or I say customers now, I spoke to students, so those were my customers every day. Like, I went out and told them about my idea, trying to validate it. And in that process, I met a lot of people along the way. A lot of people were like, hey, I like what you're doing. I want to work with you. And I didn't have any money, I didn't have any funding at that time. So I was just trying to paint this vision for them. And I kept on doing that. And I kept on getting better. And I found people coming to, we had a space in the community tech at that time, coming to the space and spending time with me and working with me and talking through all these ideas. And I just really enjoyed working with different people who had different skills. And it was my job to make sure like we all, we're all productive in some sense, and we all, have this uniform goal that is very clear. And even though like I don't think I did it right, like a lot of people who I spoke to even after in retrospect were like, actually for me, you actually didn't know what you were doing. But I think that's part of the journey, and me realizing that is like, there's the potential to just think about how far you've grown. So all those activities I really enjoyed. It was also the summer term. So I went in every day, 9 o'clock, came in, left at like 6 every day or later. I didn't like work absolutely crazy hours. I mean, sometimes we work when we get home, but it was just like a good, fun family vibe, and I really, really enjoyed that. So when I then went back to school, we eventually built the app. So it was great that we were able to finally have a finished product. We released on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store, and we felt proud. But then the biggest challenge was then, how do you get users? And that was something that I never stopped to think about as a PM. Like, I'm getting better now, and and you sort of like have ways to figure that out. But I was just focused on the building aspect. And there are different kinds of PMs, and we can touch on that a little bit more. But I was just focused on, let's build this great product, and then people would use it. And that's like a huge assumption people make. There's a lot of things that go into customer acquisition and retaining customers. So we released it and we didn't get the same. We didn't see people as excited about it. It was challenging, and I didn't even know where to start from, because this was like a problem that I haven't experienced before, and it was in the school term, and I sort of decided that, I don't think the amount of effort I need to put in here to grow it wouldn't be the same reward. So I decided to like put it on hold. And then I was like, I want to look for a job. And then what job do I want to find? I was like, I want to look something similar to what I did. And that's when I learned about product management. And then, so while I was applying it was called Job Mine, but now Waterloo Works, I specifically looked only for PM roles. I applied to only PM roles. I had a strategy. I decided that, I was determined. And that term was great. I had a lot of interviews, I had a lot of offers, and I ended up going to Microsoft in Seattle, or Redmond, should I say, to work on the smart connected peripherals team on Windows. And then that's when I had like a big shocker. That's when I learned how to do product management properly. Because a lot of things that I came in with the wrong assumption. So there I was able to get the education of being a product manager in the hard way. Like, it wasn't always smooth, but I was taught the things like, this is not what you do, this is what you do. And then sort of that started my product manager career. After that, I went to Apple, doing a similar role, iPhone product operations in California and Cupertino. And after that, I came back to Canada, same story, always wanted to be a PM. I already knew, it was clear to me what my strengths were. And then I looked for a PM job, and I got Ecobee. So Ecobee makes smart home devices, like I said, and I'm currently a product manager there, and I lead the software development for thermostat products. So I work with our mobile web, embedded server, data science teams to build experiences for our customers.
So you mentioned there that you went into Microsoft with some maybe assumptions that were wrong, that you sort of, I guess, learned from. So do you know like any of those things that you remember sort of you thought and then that were changed as you were in Microsoft?
Yeah, so okay, the nature of the team that I was at Microsoft. So at that time, we were trying to come up with the Amazon Echo competitor. So Windows wanted to invest; they were investing a lot in technologies to help propel them into the smart home space. So it was the projects were still in stealth mode; they were still trying to figure things out. So I came into the assumption of, hey, you need to talk to customers. That's the only way, and I was not allowed to talk to customers, and it was stressful for me because I felt like customers were the biggest input for where you can get information, but that's not always the case. You could talk to customers indirectly. That's what I learned, and by learning about the market and learning about trends and learning about technologies, you can actually do so much, which is what I sort of had to change my mindset on. Another thing that I also learned was proper iterative development. So while we're working on Pave, it was sort of like we know what we need to build, and this is like sort of like how we do and we go through it. And when I spec'd out the project that I wanted to work on, it was very tight with the resources that I had. The best experience I could possibly build was so close to the end of my internship that they wouldn't give enough time to test and iterate on that. So that was another thing that I had to think about. And I think this is what a lot of product managers struggle with right now. A lot of product managers that I met at very blue sky. This is what the vision is. This is 3 years, 5 years from now, and that's great. But you need to be able to think about what you can do for your customers today. And product managers who can't do that and be excited about that and get their teams excited about what you can do today, what you can build in the next 3 months, then you need to make sure that you're focused on that. You can still paint that vision, which it's very clear, but I ended up working on because I was so held on my vision. I ended up feeling like I was working on less satisfactory portion of it, like just like a proof of concept that this is what I just had to do to just like make this internship work, versus going with a mindset. And it's like half mindset then is half planning, because I think when you have like a limited amount of time and you need to account for these certain things, then the strategic way you would approach the features that you want to build will be totally different, and the things I would have done earlier versus like later on. So that's like I learned a bunch of that. I learned about planning, and then learned about like thinking about today versus just going in the future and thinking out loud. Yeah, so that was like the biggest takeaway from Microsoft for me.
How would you explain sort of what product managers do to someone who doesn't really know much about the role? Because I think it is a role that's less defined as something like development, right?
Yeah. So the way I explain it to people, when they ask, "Hey, for me, what do you do?" I always tell them in simple terms that I figure out why we need to build it, why, what, and how, right? Those are the three things that I always talk about. Like, I figure out why we need to build this. So this is making the case for the customer and the business that, I think this is a great opportunity. This is what the user experience is going to be like. This is what the user benefits are. This is how it ties back to business value, whether it's making people more engaged or, learning from that experience to build upon another experience, or where there's monetary value, where people are paying for your physical products. So that is like the why. And then the what is, this is what we're going to do, like showing the tangible and painting that vision of this is what translates to the why. This is how we can match these two things together, that if we build this, like these things would occur. So then talking about the details of the technical feasibility, and this is how it's going to work, sort of like the user flows, user interactions, like the different platforms that they'll get built upon, or the interactions that they'll have, and then the how. And I think this is where some other product managers struggle, the ones that don't have a technical background. Actually, that's unfair. I think some people without a technical background could also excel in the how we built this, but I found that some people struggle with that, because the how is then figuring out the details about, like, okay, what is the backend architecture going to look like? How do you architect this stuff? How do you build this model? If you're doing some machine learning stuff, like what is the mobile experience going to look like? And how do you work with all those developers to tie everything together? What is the server piece saying? What is the schema for the API design? And how do you bring all these teams to work together? And also going further with things like marketing and customer support, extra. So those are the things that that's like the details of what you can get done. So to just summarize, I'll always say, what to build, why to build something, what we need to build, and then how we need to build it. So you're in charge of that. And then the extra step is ensuring you do anything and everything it takes to make that vision come alive with the team that you have at your disposal. Because typically you might not have enough resources, but you need to figure that out. And why don't you have resources? Can you work with the ones that you have? How can you build in a way that you can still deliver the same value that you thought through with your why? So that's how I'll describe it.
You mentioned there are different types of PMs, so can you maybe go through just a high level what you think those differences are?
So I think for me, and this is just personal, and this is just based off of the people that I've worked with. The strategic PMs. These are PMs who actually spend time, do a lot of market research, user research, customer research, validating like the value proposition, and then they sort of come up with like a strategy or a plan for, hey, this is what we need to do. So maybe figuring out the why and what. And then they stop there and then they continue to do that. And that process is typically long, very, very research driven, very strategic. So there's those kinds of PMs, and those kind of PMs are very special, and they're very important because they help innovate. They're the ones that really think through, how can we move from where we are today? How can we find new opportunities? So those PMs are very essential for growth. They might not be as focused with like the current experience. Maybe they'll touch on this a little bit, but they're thinking maybe like 1 or 2 years in advance, or 3 years in some degrees, to try and vet, where the industry is going. Where's technology leading us to? Should we go through this approach? Should we go through this approach or that approach? So just finding differences in opportunities. The second kind of PM I'll say is a delivery PM. So sometimes they might not focus on the why and what versus things that are sort of like spec'd out, and then they figure out the how. So these are sometimes like technical product managers, regular product managers. The roadmap is sort of defined, or the what and the why is defined, and then they have to figure out the how and how do they plan this accordingly with their team, with their resources, and then it's working with the developers to unblock them, making sure that the requirements are communicated in different ways to different people. So when the person is working with the designer, the person knows how to communicate with the designer to make sure they understand and they're designing the right experience. And when they're talking to the developers, they know how to speak the developer's language. They know how to communicate with that person to ensure that the work gets done. So that's like focused on delivering and making sure they're in the day-to-day of how these things are built, how is it going to be tested, how are we going to release this? So working with the technical teams. So there's those two different ones. There are people who do both, where they spend some of their time thinking about strategy and then spend some of their time thinking about delivery. So those are definitely unique. It's definitely not easy to do. It's one of the most challenging things to really balance both, which is why some companies actually spread them out. Like they separate them, that you're either on the strategic track or you're on the delivery track. So it really depends on where you work. And they're also more like product owners too, but I don't consider them product managers. If anyone is a product owner, no offense or any much out of offend, but I don't consider them product managers because it's more about they don't really spend time with like the roadmap and all that. At least from the definition of what I understand it to be, I might be wrong. But they don't really figure out like the roadmap. The roadmap is sort of given to them, and they sort of manage the team and the rituals and the sprints, etc. So that sort of things like happen. So those are the three different types, and I think there are other types where you can be specifically for a client or a customer, but I don't really need to get into that because I think it can be broken down to those two things. So whether you're working with a client or with customers, it's still you're either figuring out the strategy or you're actually helping them build stuff. So that's how I'll describe the two, 3, 4 different types of products.
I feel like I just learned something.
I'm glad. I hope this is valuable.
Yeah, well, now I think that I definitely feel like what I'm doing right now at BlackBerry is much more strategic. Because if I'm going to be honest, before I kind of thought that delivery, since I did that for a club, was sort of the main part of product, and that this was sort of just something else. But now it's sort of you've made it clear that's these two separate things a bit, but obviously they're focusing on different parts of the product lifecycle, right?
Yeah. It's challenging. It depends on the company. So a lot of companies that I talk to, there's some companies that literally just want you to focus on working with the developers because they need someone to speak the developers' language, and that's a lot. It's a full-time job to make sure every day the developers know what they need to do. They're unblocked, they're productive. That is a lot of responsibilities. And then if you want to add being strategic and thinking about the future, it's challenging doing both. I do both at Ecobee, and I know for sure I'm very stretched thin. It's either I don't find enough time to think and be strategic, or I don't have time for delivery. So what I do, or what we do at Ecobee, is we use our OKRs, like we follow objectives and key results. So I split 30% of my time doing more research, strategic thinking, and then I do 70% delivery, because I do think it's very valuable working with developers. But I always make sure I have one or two OKRs specifically for research. That helps me figure out what I need to build in the future. So if I do research this quarter, maybe in the next quarter or two, I already have an idea of, okay, this work is going to keep developers busy for the next 6 months. So I need to just move that around.
So what do you think would distinguish a good product manager from a really great one?
Okay, I'll talk about great PMs.
Right.
So what I'll define as a great PM is someone who, number one, is very user-centric. Like, they know the reasons why they're doing things, and they're a working embodiment of what that is. Like, when you speak to this product manager, all your questions are answered. You already know what you need to do. You're aligned with the vision. And next thing is being able to rally people around and get people excited. That is super important. Because no matter what, even though you're the smartest person and you know what you're talking about is right, if you can't get people excited about it, if you can't paint the vision, if you can't be like, hey, I've done all this research, I think this is going to work, maybe not, but here, this is the reasons why I think we should do this. Because sometimes you're dealing with like unknown territory where you're working on something totally new or novel and it hasn't really been done. And you need to make sure the team is super excited about it. So a great PM knows how to, interact with every single person on the team and know what they like, and then appeal to them based off of the work that they have to do and make them excited about the things that they have to do. And there'll be times where the team morale is low or people still ask and question, why are we doing this? But the person is there all the time to make that case for, hey, this is why we come in here every morning and do what we do. So that's like a great PM. A great communicator. Building relationships is super easy. It's like second nature, because as a PM, you're only as great as the team around you. So if your team is like doesn't feel like they can fight for you, they wouldn't. And if you built a team around yourself that, whatever it is that you do, even if like they're not convinced with the vision, but they're like, hey, you know what, Nick is an awesome PM. I'm not sure this is gonna work. I don't know if users want this, but I know I trust Nick and he's gonna do it. He's gonna make sure everything is great. And then so someone that speaks for their team, because then you also have to shield the developers from any external things that would affect them. Being able to like take that blame and responsibility, whether you do good or do bad, and just setting a bar for performance for your products, for how you want to work. Those are the things that bring like what a great PM is together. User-centric, understands what needs to be done, like really focused on users and data, communication, managing relationships, making sure that you understand how to communicate to different people and appeal to different things. And what was the last thing I said? Can't remember, but yeah, most of those things, setting the bar for the experience that you want. Like, this is what we're gonna do, this is how we're gonna ship, this is how we're gonna test. So that I would define as a great PM.
Obviously, we're going to have a lot of students sort of listening to this type of podcast. I went to like a coffee chat for UWPM, and one of like the biggest questions people always ask is like, how do I get into this, right? Because it's not so clear as like development, where you work on some side projects and you can put that on your resume and like get some interviews, right? So do you have any advice for people that would be looking to maybe get into PM?
So I'm just going to do a plug real quick.
Yeah.
I'm actually working on a project right now that is supposed to help people with this problem, which is how do you transition into product manager? So I'm doing a project with my friend Helen Huang. So we're telling stories of how people transition into the current product manager role. So we're trying to write a book about this, and then we also have a podcast. It's called Doing a Thing. We're available on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, everywhere. Link in the description.
Yes, it will be. Yeah.
I'll send it to Nick. But yeah, so we've been talking to a lot of PMs. I think we've spoken to over 30 PMs right now. And the book is going to be about like their transition, like what we ask questions about their educational background. So first things first is you don't need a particular educational background to be a product manager. Then we talk about the major events that happened till they transition to their product manager role. Like, what job did they have first? Why did they do that? Why did they leave that job? And then we talk about how they grow. So now I'm going to answer the question. The reality is, it's absolutely very challenging to become a product manager. It's very competitive, and there's a role where you typically need a lot of experience. Because, just to give you an example, if you work at a regular startup, on average, if you're trying to ship a product, which maybe takes like 6 months to a year to build, that is going to cost the company approximately like at least 100 grand. Let's say, even if people aren't really getting paid like seriously, versus, you're leading projects worth millions of dollars. So giving someone $100,000 is a huge responsibility. Being able to say, you know what, I need this PM to work on this project, that's going to cost me $100,000. That needs to happen, and that's a lot of risk. So you need to make sure that you need to de-risk that to the employer as much as possible. So there are two things about going into a PM role. Two problems you need to solve. Number one, if you don't have the skills, you need to figure out all the skills to get into a product manager role. So what are the skills that you need? You need to be able to ship a product. You can't be a product manager without having to without shipping any product. You can, but it's extremely difficult. You need to be able to show how you work with people and how you the life cycle. You need to be able to help people visualize how you bring something into life that isn't just theoretical. Because you can read so many books and be like, hey, this is how you would actually create a product, but it's nothing like doing that. So you need to find opportunities to be able to do that, find opportunities to work with people on real projects that have real outputs, impacts, and implications. Doing that. So that's like the first thing that you need to do. Up your skills. So if you're sitting across from someone saying, I want to be a product manager at your company, this is why, they can look at you and be like, okay, you have all the skills. And number two, you need to be able to solve the problem of how do you convince someone to hire you as a PM without any experience. And I think like whatever skills that you brought up would also help with that. And then it comes across as, how do you then package yourself? How do you build a brand across the way you think and matching that with the core values of a company or what the companies are doing? So I think that would be the biggest selling point. But honestly, the easiest way that I would say, if you can grab a friend who's a designer or a developer and come together and work on a project, not just like a hack project that you want to do over a weekend. You need to work in it for a while. You need to talk about the process, like how did the vision come up, like what are the design processes like, what were the sprints like, and then how did you work with the developers, what challenges did you face, and telling that as a story. And then you can write. There's so many things that you can use to write, Medium, etc. Putting that up, documenting your process, and all the way to get to the user. And I think what helped me was the project that I work on with my Ecobee to Pave, because I got to the point where I just launched a product. We didn't grow. We didn't have a ton of users. I think we had like maybe 500 users at max. That's not a lot at all. But I was able to communicate like all the steps and all the struggles throughout the design struggles. Releasing it. Making trade-offs with developers. Working with different teams and different people. That is what is going to get people to listen to you. And as long as you can build those skills and understand how that contributes to your experience, I think that will be extremely valuable. So one thing that I would advise people who want to go into PM is stay close to the technology. And by saying that, I mean, don't see being a PM as escaping from becoming a developer. So I hear this a lot where people say, I don't like to code, that's why I want to be a PM. Or the misconception of like, I like to tell people what to do. I want to be, because with the PM role, you lead without authority. You're not going to be telling people what to do. People ask you, what do I need to do? So yes, you have teams that you foresee and you lead different product teams, like in some cases, but it's not like, oh, you're my developer, you have to do whatever I say. You never think about it like that. And people who think about it with that mindset, I guarantee you would find it very challenging to move forward, because number one, you need to earn the respect of developers. And that's not something that you get by just, I don't like to code, or, I just want to tell people what to do. And by saying staying close to technology, I mean, if you have a technical background, great. That really helps you and it goes a long way. So I would recommend, because based on my experience and what I've seen, the people who have a technical background struggle less than those that don't, right? Not saying that you need a technical background. I'm not saying that there are a lot of very great PMs there that don't have a technical background, but understand technology. Understand how puzzles fit together. Because honestly, what development is a puzzle. Right? You have a backend, it connects to something, right? This is what the user sees. If the user clicks something, it goes somewhere. What is that? What is that? Where does it go and where does it send back? What does the user expect to see? If there's an error, why? Like you can picture it however way you can, but lean on your developers and stay close to technology. Because if you ever want to transition into the strategic role fully, like completely, it's very difficult for someone to just give you that, except you want to go into consulting, which is totally different. To give you that strategic thinking immediately, you need to work work your way up. So being able to understand developers and talk their language is super important, because product managers is centered around development, because development is how it gets to the customer, right? So I've seen people who are like very design focused PMs, great, but like you still need to be able to understand technology. The technical feasibility of things is super important, because I've had people reach out to me. In some cases, they pitch me things that they can't even build. Like, it's not even technically feasible, and it happens at work too. Like, I speak to other PMs and they're like, "Oh, we should do this," and I'm like, "Oh, we can't because of these reasons why," and you can see how sad sometimes they get, because it's like you have this idea, you think this is the best thing in the world, but you didn't vet that idea by thinking about, hey, this is how we need to build. Then you end up being disappointed in whatever you can deliver. Which is why I feel some non-technical people struggle, because they're like, oh, the developers are never going to be able to build my idea. So I mean, like, I went on a little bit of like a ramble, but I would say stay close to technology, be a PM for the right reasons, not just it's fancy or not understand. Like, make sure you talk to a lot of PMs and understand, which is why I think the book that we're working on will be very helpful. So, on our podcast, like I said, is doing a thing like just, and then you can also add me on LinkedIn, where I post regularly about lessons from product. I post articles about product managers, as well as like different things. So definitely, like, reach out to me. I'm always happy to grab coffee and talk more about being a product manager. I love it. I've been doing it for over 2 years full time, like almost 3 years, like if you count my internships. So I've learned a lot, and there's still a lot to learn. Yeah.
I think that's pretty much it then. Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of the bases. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. It was great.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Feel free to leave some feedback in the comments on how we can make this better, and don't forget to check out UWPM on Facebook for any upcoming events.